kind of not really solving the problem by saying we'll fall back to DAC. That doesn't solve anything for you. There was an attempt made, and we are actually seeing some of these ideas being resurrected under the name of accountability these days. But the idea of originator control was, okay, why can't I apply, I will allow information to be copied from one file to another, but if you copy it, I'm going to kind of propagate the access control lists so that the access control list on the copy will reflect the access control list on the original, and now I'll start enforcing these additional controls. So the approach taken there was, let copying happen, but we'll keep track of what controls we need to enforce on the copies. Okay, and I don't think anyone actually ever tried to implement this, but this was proposed. The modern trusted computing approach actually says, let's try to prevent copying from happening. Basically, that's what it boils down to saying. It says, I'm going to give you this information, and I'm going to let you open it in a very, very confined environment, and only a trusted application will be able to see it. And we will rely on the trusted computing mechanisms on your client machine to make sure that no other software can sneakily get that information. And we have to rely on the trusted viewer to kind of not be cooperating in trying to leak that information out. So that's a different kind of style of enforcement, and that's really what trusted computing was invented for. So can that be used? So that's the modern approach to this information sharing problem, and it uses a mix of cryptographic and access control techniques. At its very foundation, trusted computing technology provides you security for your root keys, so they never have to escape the environment of the TPM chip. But it also provides you controls on who can actually use these keys. That's an access control kind of control. It's not just a question of whether it is clear text or plain text. Even in this protected environment, only approved applications can use the key. And moreover, there are enhancements in memory protection technology that I already mentioned. So there is a mix of cryptographic and access control techniques. And I find this interesting because, these two communities have kind of, there's been a little bit of synergy. Cryptographic techniques have been used for access control hierarchies and things like that. And, Mike has done some very good work in that area with his students. But this is a sort of recognition that you really need some synergy between these two approaches because they are fundamentally solving different problems, but you need to solve both of them. And, at the very foundational level, you have to ensure that your trusted viewers is unable to see the content in clear text unless it has the ability to access the correct keys to decrypt that content. But coupled with that fact, we want to inject access control to get us a degree of policy flexibility and policy mechanism separation, both of which are very important requirements in any practical system. You need to have policy flexibility. Even if you're interested in only one specific policy as a vendor, you want to have a platform that has policy flexibility so that if your customer changes, if you have different customers with different policy needs, you can meet all their requirements from a single platform. Okay? So that's an important requirement. And if you try to embed all your policy into cryptographic mechanisms, you get a very tight coupling between policy and mechanism. So if your policies change, you kind of have to change your entire cryptographic scheme. And even if you're able to do that on the fly, it's kind of hard. How are you going to go get it deployed on all these platforms? And by the way, we are talking about platforms in tens of millions, hundreds of millions, that kind of scale. So it's not going to be easy to do policy mechanism separation unless you have it built in. And access control mechanisms provide you sort of a natural way to do policy mechanism separation. So the first insight is that the trusted viewer will not allow you access to the plain text unless you have access to the correct key. And the second insight is that even with access to the correct key, the trusted viewer Well, it's trusted. It's going to enforce policy. So it could show you the content, but it might decide not to show you the content. Okay? And that's where access control kicks in. So our goal here is to try to sort of marry these three things, these two ideas together. So now I'm coming to this three-layer framework that I talked about. So in addressing this problem, we found this sort of decomposition of the problem space to be very useful. It's really 5 layers, but the topmost layer is very informal. The real engineering is done in the 3 layers sandwiched in between, the policy, enforcement, and implementation layers, which I will be talking about in a moment. And then your target platform is the technology that we talked about. Okay, if you had a different target platform, you could specify that too. But here we are fixing the target platform to be trusted computing. And what you do at the topmost layer, which we call the objective layer, you have to scope the problem. So we have scoped the information sharing problem in a very, very narrow but interesting case. This is by no means the most general form of information sharing. In fact, it's a very tiny piece of the overall information sharing problem. We are looking at the read-only case. So you get documents, you don't modify them, and then further disseminate them. Okay? It's a sort of one-way dissemination. We are talking about document-level controls versus query-level control. So you either have access to the document or not. The access is not really dependent on the content of the document. That's the point that this bullet tries to make. The third one is super distribution. I don't want to have to encrypt the document differently for every recipient. I want to do the encryption once and follow this access wherever authorized. So encrypt once, access wherever authorized. There are other schemes in which the content has to be differently encrypted for each recipient. And there's a fair amount of literature in the trusted computing arena which follows that line of thinking. Because if I encrypt differently for each machine, then I know it can only be opened on that particular machine. Okay, the protocols for doing that are discussed in the literature, but there's less discussion of how to support super distribution, where you encrypt only once, and if you happen to be at an authorized machine, you can actually access it. And then finally, to have some support for offline access. So if you're required to be online every time you do access, the benefit is that you can go to some central place and make some kind of policy check and get some updated information. This is especially important if you're doing revocation and you want the effect of the revocation to take place immediately. You need to refresh your policy on every access. So, that's not an acceptable usage model. So we need to have some access for offline support. So that's our definition of the problem. And this is something you need to think of at the topmost objective layer. But we also need to scope the solution. And we have already scoped the solution by saying we are going to be using trusted computing technology. Okay? So we fixed the sort of bottom layer of technology. But now we are going to take this two-phased approach that this super distribution will work, but it will work only within a group of machines. It's not going to work across all possible machines that are TPM equipped. It is given current definition of the TPM. If you think about it, maybe that's not a problem that's easy to solve. Okay, but the TPM technology as it exists today doesn't solve it. Okay, it's not possible for me to encrypt once and sort of use wherever authorized, view wherever authorized, without having continuous online access. Okay, so this is the solution space that we are looking at. You have to have the ability to enroll a machine into that group, and then we can do